Owen Hurst was on his knees in the lobby of the Adair Grand Hotel, replacing a cracked floor tile nobody had noticed except him, when the most powerful woman in the building crouched down beside him and said something that stopped every thought in his head. "Can you be my husband tonight?" She wasn't laughing. She wasn't embarrassed. Celeste Adair, whose name was on the building, whose picture was on the cover of last month's Fortune, whose assistant was standing 6 feet away pretending he hadn't heard a single word, was looking at Owen with the calm, absolute seriousness of a woman who had already decided on an outcome and was simply waiting for the world to confirm it. Owen set down his chisel. He looked at his hands. Still dirty. Still his. And then he answered her. Not the way a man answers when he's flustered. Not the way a man answers when he's flattered. Not the way every man she'd ever asked anything of answered, carefully, politically, already calculating what was in it for him. He answered her the way a man answers when he has nothing to prove and nowhere to be except home by 3:30 to pick up his 6-year-old daughter from school. What he said shocked her. And here's what nobody in that lobby understood in that moment. Not her assistant, not the security guard who glanced over once and then very deliberately looked away, not the couple checking in at the front desk who caught the edge of the exchange and immediately invented a story that wasn't even close to the truth. Nobody knew what Celeste Adair had been carrying for the past 4 months. Nobody knew what was waiting for her at the dinner table that evening, who would be sitting across from her, and exactly what she needed to walk in as. Nobody knew how close she was to losing something she had spent 11 years building. And nobody knew that Owen Hurst, who had $32 in his account, a daughter who believed he hung the moon, and a second job he was 3 weeks from quitting, was about to become the one person she couldn't manage, couldn't budget for, and couldn't stop thinking about. This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. And if a story about 2 people who had no business finding each other actually moves you, hit that like button. You'll understand exactly why before this is over. Now let me take you back to where it started. Owen Hurst's alarm went off at 5:12 in the morning. Not 5 o'clock. Not 5:15. 5:12, because 3 years ago he had set it for 5:15 and discovered, through trial and error, that those 3 extra minutes were the difference between making BEA's lunch properly and making it in a hurry. And there was a difference. She could taste the difference. She was 6 years old and she could taste the difference, which told him everything he needed to know about the kind of person she was going to become. He lay in the dark for exactly 30 seconds. He had learned not to lie there longer. Longer, and the thinking started, and the thinking before 6 a.m. was a thing he had no use for. He got up. The apartment on Daly Street was not a bad apartment. He was clear with himself about that. The radiator worked most of the time. The windows faced east, which meant the mornings were bright even in winter. The woman in 4B played music on weekend evenings, but it was low enough that you had to stop and listen to hear it, and sometimes, on the hard nights, he did stop and listen, and it helped. He wasn't ashamed of that. But the apartment showed its age the way certain things do, not in any single obvious way, but in accumulation. The kitchen tiles were the wrong shade of white, closer to cream, closer to giving up. The bathroom faucet exhaled a slow drip that he had repaired twice and that returned each time like a bad habit. The hall closet door needed lifting before it would close, and he did this automatically now without thinking, the way you adapt to the small humiliations of the things you own. He made coffee. He stood at the counter and watched it brew and thought about nothing. That was a skill he had developed. Not meditation, not peace, just the deliberate suppression of thought for the 6 minutes it took the coffee maker to finish. His ex-wife Denise used to say he was the most internal man she'd ever met. She said it first as a compliment, then later as a complaint, and then finally she stopped saying it at all because she stopped talking to him about most things, and then she stopped being there. 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, 14 days. Not that he counted. He didn't count. He just knew. He opened the refrigerator and took out the sandwich components with practiced sequence. Whole wheat, turkey, The good mustard he liked, and the cheap one he used for himself because the difference in price was $3 a jar, and $3 a jar over a year was somewhere around $150, and $150 was a car payment. He cut the crust off her bread. He always cut the crust off. Not because she asked anymore. She had stopped asking at age 5, understanding at some wordless level that asking wasn't necessary, that her father had simply filed this under things he would do without being asked. Like the crust. Like always having her juice cup washed and ready on the second shelf. Like checking the weather every morning so he could remind her to take her jacket without making it a discussion. He packed the lunch. He made his own coffee, black, no sugar, in the thermos with a dent in the side that he kept meaning to replace. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a pineapple that he had chosen at a gas station with enormous seriousness, was a drawing she'd made at school 3 days ago. She had brought it home like a diploma. He looked at it now the way he looked at it every morning. 3 stick figures. A tall one with dark scribbles for hair, clearly him. A small one beside it with a big circle smile, clearly B. And between them, or slightly behind, a third one. Taller than B, shorter than him. Pink dress. Long hair drawn in orange crayon. No face yet, or not a finished face, just 2 dots for eyes. He had asked her about it the night she brought it home. "Who's that?" he had said, pointing at the third figure. "The mom," she had said, with complete simplicity, the way children say true things that cost them nothing because they haven't yet learned that the same words cost adults everything. "Whose mom?" She had looked at him with those even, clear eyes. "Ours," she had said. And then she had gone to find her stuffed rabbit. He had stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. Not sad, exactly. Something more complicated than sad. Something that didn't have a clean word attached to it, which was the kind of feeling he was most familiar with. He heard her feet on the floor before he saw her. Be moved through the world at 2 speeds, asleep and in motion, and the transition between them was always sudden, always complete. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her yellow pajamas, hair flattened on one side, rabbit under her arm, with the expression of someone who had important things to report. "Dad," she said. "Good morning. I had a dream about a whale. A good whale or a bad whale?" She considered this with genuine seriousness, pulling herself up onto the counter stool. An okay whale, she decided. It wasn't trying to cause problems. It was just there. "I respect an okay whale," Owen said. She accepted this and reached for the juice cup he had already placed in front of her. This was the part of his day he could never fully explain to anyone. Not that he tried. But if he had tried, if someone had asked him on any ordinary morning what he was doing this for, what the whole unglamorous architecture of his life was organized around, he would have pointed at this. At B on the counter stool with her rabbit under her arm, asking him to validate a neutral whale. This was the reason for everything. Not the large version of the word reason. The small one. The one that fit in a kitchen on Daly Street at 5:47 in the morning before the world had found its voice. He dropped her at school at 7:38. She kissed him on the cheek, she always did, then looked at him with the routine gravity she brought to goodbyes. "Dad." "Yeah. What was the best thing that happened yesterday?" It was their ritual. Hers, originally, begun at age 4 for reasons he couldn't fully trace. Every morning at drop-off. He had to answer before she walked through the doors. He had to mean it. Yesterday had been a long day. He had regrouted a bathroom on the east side of the city for 8 hours. He had eaten lunch in his truck. He had come home and made pasta and helped me practice her letters until his eyes were slow and heavy. "You fell asleep reading," he said. "And you had your hand on the rabbit the whole time. Even when you were out. You didn't let go." She smiled. It was the smile she only used when something landed exactly right. "Okay," she said. "Good." She went through the double doors without looking back. He sat in the truck for a moment after the doors closed. Then he started the engine, first try, which was not always how it went, and pulled out onto the street. The Adair Grand Hotel was 22 minutes from BEA's school on a clear morning. He had driven the route enough times that he no longer needed to think about it. He drove. He drank his coffee. He let the city fill the windows the way it did, indifferent and ongoing. The hotel's service entrance was on the north side, off Carver Lane. He parked in the spot third from the wall, which he had claimed by habit rather than assignment. He pulled his kit from the bed of the truck, the hard case with the tile cutters, the grout bags, the knee pads that had left permanent impressions in the fabric of 2 pairs of jeans, and he walked to the door. The lobby of the Adair Grand opened to the city like a display case. 40-foot ceilings. Marble floors so pale they reflected everything above them. A chandelier over the central entrance that Owen had watched a crew install 18 months ago, and that required 3 specialists and 2 full days, and which, he happened to know, had cost more than he would earn in the next 4 years. The lobby was full of people. Not one of them looked at him. He found the cracked tile in the northwest corner, reported 3 days ago, triaged, passed down the service chain to him, and he set his case down and lowered himself to his knees and got to work. Above him, the chandelier caught the morning light and broke it into pieces. Below it, Owen Hurst did the work that held the floor together. Nobody noticed. That was fine. That had always been fine. He was used to it. He heard her before he saw her. Not her voice. The lobby heard her voice constantly, filtered through headsets and speakerphones and the choreographed language of people who managed proximity to power. He heard the change in the room. The particular quality of attention that moves through a space when something important has arrived and everyone is deciding simultaneously how to position themselves relative to it. Owen kept his eyes on the tile. He had learned this in his first week working buildings like the Adair Grand. The lobby staff, the concierge, the men and women who crossed that marble in tailored suits, they watched each other all the time, calibrating, adjusting, reading the room the way sailors read weather. He had learned to be something different. To be the floor, essentially. To occupy the background so completely that the foreground could happen around him without interruption. He pressed the grout line smooth and did not look up. Then he heard the assistant's voice, low and clipped and carrying the specific strain of someone managing a problem that has just gotten considerably larger. She's already inside. Yes. No, tell him we'll call back. Don't confirm anything. Owen set down the spreader. He told himself it was because his knees needed a break. He had been down for 40 minutes, and the marble was unforgiving in the way that expensive things often were. He straightened up slowly, pressed a hand to the small of his back, and turned to look for the water bottle he had left against the wall. That was when he saw her. Celeste Adair was standing in the center of her own lobby, holding her phone in both hands the way people hold things when the information on the screen has just rearranged something they thought was settled. She was wearing the dark coat. Her assistant was 3 paces behind her, already on a second call. 2 other members of her team had broken off to either side, positioning themselves with the practiced efficiency of people trained to form a human buffer. The lobby moved around her the way water moves around a stone. Everything accommodated her presence without acknowledging it directly. The front desk staff were suddenly very focused on their screens. The doorman had found something to adjust about the position of the luggage cart. 3 guests waiting near the elevator bank were pretending with extraordinary effort not to stare. Owen noticed none of this in the analytical way. He noticed it the way you notice weather. The atmospheric pressure of the room had changed, and he had registered the change before he consciously identified the source. What he registered next was the bank of cameras gathering on the other side of the main entrance glass. Not phones. Not the casual, individual documentation of guests. These were press cameras, clustered and deliberate, already oriented toward the revolving doors with the patient readiness of people who knew exactly who was coming out and were simply waiting for it to happen. 3 of them. Then 4. The 5th arrived from the direction of the valet stand and took a position with the comfort of a man who had done this many times in many places. Celeste had not looked up from her phone. Her assistant had not noticed. The rest of the team was oriented inward, managing internal logistics, unaware that the exterior situation had quietly shifted in the last 90 seconds. Owen calculated it without deciding to calculate it. She would reach the main entrance in approximately 40 steps. The revolving door would deposit her directly into the sight line of 5 cameras with no physical barrier between her face and their lenses. Whatever she was reading on that phone, whatever had drawn that particular expression, not panic, something more controlled and therefore more expensive than panic, would be there in front of the glass in approximately 30 seconds. He said it across the lobby without raising his voice. Service corridor. 3rd door on your left. Comes out on Carver Lane. The lobby did not stop. Conversations continued. The elevator arrived and opened and closed. But Celeste Adair looked up from her phone. She looked at him the way people look at something they were not expecting to find where they found it. Not with irritation. With the fast, clean attention of someone who processes information quickly and had just received a piece of it from an unexpected source. He pointed. Not at her. At the corridor. She looked at the cameras gathering beyond the glass. She looked back at him. Something shifted in her face, the rapid, imperceptible assessment of a woman who has built a career on reading situations accurately and quickly. She walked toward the corridor. Her team followed without being told, the way trained teams do when the lead makes an unexpected move with sufficient confidence. Owen lowered his hand and turned back to his tile. He heard footsteps behind him 12 seconds later. Rapid, purposeful, the specific energy of a man who has realized something happened on his floor without his involvement and is now arriving to reassert oversight. Hurst. He didn't look up. He picked up the spreader and continued working the grout line. Hurst. Pryor Vance, the duty manager, arrived in his peripheral vision like a weather front. He was a compact man in his late 40s who wore his position the way certain people wore watches, loudly, and primarily to be seen wearing it. Were you just speaking to Ms. Adair? I pointed her toward the service corridor, Owen said. Press was forming outside. That is not your, Pryor stopped. Started again with a different calibration, quieter but no less pointed. Your job description does not include directing building ownership anywhere. If there is a situation requiring Ms. Adair's team to be rerouted, that goes through front desk, it goes through me. You are here to replace a tile. Owen looked at the tile. He had replaced the tile. He had, in fact, finished the tile approximately 20 minutes ago and had been working on the adjacent grout seal out of professional habit, because the seal was deteriorating and it would become a problem in approximately 2 months and someone would be called to fix it then, and that someone would be him, and he preferred not to make the same trip twice. He said none of this. Understood, he said. Pryor looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who had expected more resistance and was slightly disappointed by the absence of it. Then he straightened his jacket and walked back toward the front desk with the bearing of someone who has successfully defended a perimeter. Owen repacked his kit. He was latching the case when he heard footsteps again. Lighter this time. No urgency in them. The sound of someone who had made a decision and was walking toward it rather than away from something. He looked up. Celeste Adair was standing 2 feet away. Her assistant was not with her. Her team was not with her. She was alone in the way that powerful people are rarely alone in buildings that carry their name, completely, deliberately, on purpose. She looked at him the way she had looked at him from across the lobby. That same rapid assessment. Except now there was something different in it. Something that had been added in the interval between then and now. A quality he couldn't name precisely, but that he recognized in the vague, instinctive way you recognize things you have encountered somewhere before. She looked at him like he was a solution she hadn't known she was looking for. She crouched down to his level. This was unusual. This was, he thought, the single most unusual thing that had happened to him in a building in 15 years. Can I ask you something? She said. You own the building, Owen said. You can ask me anything. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Close. Can you be my husband? She said. Tonight. Just tonight. I'll explain everything, But I need an answer now. He looked at her. He looked at his hands, tile dust still in the creases, a faint grout line across the knuckle of his right thumb. He thought about BEA's drawing on the refrigerator. The third figure with the orange hair and no finished face. He thought about $32 in his account and a truck that started on the first try this morning, which was not always how it went. He thought about none of these things consciously. He just looked at her, this woman kneeling in a lobby that bore her name, asking the most unreasonable question he had heard in recent memory with the complete, direct composure of someone who was not embarrassed by what she needed. And he said, "Tell me why first." She did not flinch. She did not recalibrate. She told him. She called it a briefing. That was the word she used. The first time she called, 2 days after the lobby, at 7:14 in the morning, which he noted and filed away, because people who call at 7:14 have been awake for some time already, she said, "I'd like to schedule a briefing. So we're aligned before Thursday." Not a conversation. Not a meeting. A briefing. He said he was available Wednesday afternoon. She said her assistant would send the details. Her assistant sent the details. He showed up to a conference room on the 14th floor of his own workplace wearing the same work clothes he wore every day because nobody had told him to wear anything else, and he sat across a table from Celeste Adair and 3 laminated pages of bullet points she had apparently prepared the night before. The pages covered the name of the event, a private dinner for a consortium of European investors she had been cultivating for 14 months. The cover story, husband, name Owen, profession contractor, kept largely out of her professional world by mutual preference, together 4 years. The names of the 6 people who would be at the table, with brief biographical notes on each. The one person he absolutely needed to avoid discussing business with, a man named Aldrich Fenn, who was, the bullet points informed him, perceptive and informal by design. She walked him through it efficiently. He listened. He asked 2 questions, both practical. She answered them without hesitation. At the end, she capped her pen and said, "Any other concerns?" He thought about it honestly. Why me? She looked at him with the expression she seemed to default to when she felt a question was beside the point. "We've been through that. You told me what you needed," he said. "You didn't tell me why you picked the man fixing your floor." "Because you were there." There were 40 people in that lobby. She was quiet for a moment. Then she gathered the laminated pages and aligned them against the table edge and said, "You noticed the cameras before my team did. You solved the problem without being asked and without making it a moment. That's a specific kind of competence." She looked up. "I need specific competence on Thursday." He nodded. He did not point out that she had answered a different version of the question than the one he asked. She noticed that he noticed. He could tell by the slight adjustment in her posture, a degree of recalibration, subtle, involuntary. The kind of thing you only catch in someone if you've been watching them carefully enough and long enough to know the difference between how they hold themselves when they're fully comfortable and how they hold themselves when something has arrived that they weren't prepared for. She wasn't prepared for him to leave it there. Most people, he suspected, pushed when she deflected. Most people treated her silences as invitations for negotiation. He left it there because it was the truth, and the truth didn't require his assistance. Wednesday became Thursday, became the following Monday, became a pattern that neither of them acknowledged as a pattern. She called. Not every day. But enough that he stopped being surprised by the sight of her name on his phone screen. Logistics, mostly. The cover story required small refinements. Her assistant had mentioned the husband to Fenn's assistant, and Fenn's assistant had mentioned it back, which meant the story had taken on a brief independent life of its own and required minor maintenance. She would relay these things in the same brisk ballet language as the laminated pages. He would listen. He would occasionally offer a correction when something didn't sound like the way a person actually talked about their own marriage. "You told your CFO we met at a hotel conference," he said once. People don't say hotel conference. They say conference. The hotel is incidental. A pause. That's a very small distinction. It's the distinction between something someone remembers and something someone made up. Another pause, longer. Fine. Conference. These were not conversations about anything real. He was clear with himself about that. They were operational. They were the careful, contained exchanges of two people managing a transaction with professionalism and appropriate distance. But he noticed things. He noticed she called in the early morning more than the evening. He noticed she had not once mentioned a single person in her life that existed outside the professional category. No friend she had spoken to about this. No family member who knew, no one. He noticed that when he said something that surprised her, she went quiet in a specific way that was different from her operational quiet. Slower, fuller, like a room after a window has been opened. He did not do anything with what he noticed. He had learned what happened when you did things with what you noticed about women who were not available to be noticed in that way. He had learned it across 4 years of a marriage that had started as two people genuinely trying and ended as two people genuinely exhausted, one of whom eventually stopped trying before the other one knew the trying had stopped. Denise had not left because she stopped loving him. He was clear about that too, even now, especially now. She had left because loving him had started to feel, in her words, like loving a house that was finished being built. "You're done," she had said. "You decided who you are and you're done. And I kept waiting for the next room and there isn't one." He had thought about that a great deal in the years since. He had decided she was right and wrong in equal measure. He was not done. But he had become careful. He had become someone who checked the stability of a thing before he put weight on it, who learned the load-bearing points before he committed to anything structural. After Denise, after the specific education of losing both in the same year, he had learned to move slowly in the direction of anything that mattered. Celeste Adair was not a direction he was moving in. He was clear about that. He was not prepared for B. It happened on a Friday morning, 12 days before the dinner. He had forgotten, he would later accept this as the correct word, forgotten, that BEA's school operated on a modified schedule that week, which meant she was home. Which meant she was in the kitchen in her rabbit pajamas eating cereal when his phone rang at 7:22 and he answered it without thinking because he was making coffee and not paying sufficient attention to the particular shape of the morning. "I need to move the dinner," Celeste said. "Fen's flying out Saturday. We'd need to do Tuesday." "Tuesday works." From the kitchen, "Dad, who's that?" He turned. B was watching him with the full focused attention of a 6-year-old who has heard something she wants to understand better. He lowered the phone briefly. "A person from work." "From the hotel?" "Yes." She processed this. He returned to the call. "Tuesday is fine. Same time." "I'll have Denise confirm." From the kitchen again, louder now, the way B got louder when she felt a question was being insufficiently addressed. "Is it the lady who owns it?" He closed his eyes for 1/2 second. "B. Is it?" Celeste had gone quiet on the other end. Not her operational quiet. The other kind. He made a decision quickly. "Yes." B appeared in the kitchen doorway holding her cereal bowl with both hands, looking at the phone in his hand as though she could see through it to the person on the other side. "Tell her the third tile in the northwest corner still has a rough edge," B said seriously. Dad was going to go back, but he ran out of time. He looked at his daughter. "She can probably hear you," he said. B was unrattled. "Good," she said. "Then she knows." A pause on the line. Then Celeste Adair's voice, and it was not the voice from the laminated pages, not the voice from the briefings, not the voice from any of the operational calls of the past 2 weeks. It was quieter. Different in a way he could not immediately name. "Tell her I'll have someone look at it Monday," Celeste said. He relayed this. B considered it. "Is she nice?" she asked. He looked at the phone. He thought about the laminated pages. He thought about the early morning calls. He thought about the way Celeste had gone quiet a moment ago, and the specific quality of the quiet, and what it was that made her quiet in that way. "I don't know yet," he said to his daughter. B absorbed this with the particular gravity she reserved for important assessments. "That means probably yes," she said, and went back to her cereal. On the phone, he could hear Celeste breathing. Just breathing, present and still, on the other end of a line she had not yet ended. "Tuesday," she said finally. "Same time." She hung up. Owen stood in the kitchen for a long moment. He could hear Bea's spoon against her bowl. He could hear the radiator settling. He could hear the city outside, indifferent and ongoing, going about its morning as though nothing had shifted in any direction. But something had shifted. In the particular quiet way that things shift when a child has said a true thing and both adults in the room have had to sit down inside it whether they were ready to or not. He poured his coffee. He did not examine it further. Not yet. The dinner was at the Hargrove Club on Thursday evening. 3 days away. That was how long Celeste Adair needed to prepare a version of her life that included a husband, a convincing one, for the benefit of 11 people who had spent a collective 40 years learning to identify things that were not what they appeared to be. She explained all of this standing in the service corridor of her own hotel, 3 feet from a man whose name she had read off his work badge because she had not previously known it, speaking in the measured, unornamented way she spoke when she had stripped a situation down to its functional components and was communicating only what was necessary. The dinner was Hargrove's quarterly chair event. Her position on the board of the Adair Foundation, her late father's foundation, the one that funded 14 community health programs across the city and whose continued operation required the sustained goodwill of exactly the people who would be in that room on Thursday, was being quietly contested. Not openly. Nothing was done openly at the Hargrove Club. It was being contested in the way powerful things were always contested among powerful people, through the slow accumulation of doubt, whispered at the right volume in the right rooms until it crystallized into consensus. The doubt, in this case, was about stability. About whether a woman of 41 who had inherited a hotel empire and a philanthropic legacy and had, by every measurable account, managed both with considerable competence, was nonetheless too solitary, too self-contained, too structurally alone to be trusted with the long-term stewardship of something that had her father's name on it. "They're not questioning my judgment," she said. "They're questioning my foundation. The personal kind. They want to see that I'm anchored to something outside the work." Owen had listened to all of this without interrupting. "And one dinner fixes that?" he said. "One dinner changes what they see," she said. "What they see is what they decide." He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had said yes. Not because of the money, though she had named a number that he would not have been able to pretend was irrelevant. He had said yes because she had been honest with him and he could not think of a clean reason to walk away from someone who had been honest with him. He had enough clean reasons already and they had not made him happy. So, 3 days. She had sent a car to his apartment on Tuesday evening. He had not expected a car. He had expected directions. The car arrived at 6:15, which was 45 minutes after he'd picked Bea up from school, 15 minutes after Bea had eaten dinner, and directly in the middle of Bea's third attempt to teach the stuffed rabbit to stand upright, an effort she undertook with the patience and systematic rigor of a research scientist. "There's a car outside," Bea said, looking out the window with the authority of someone whose job it was to monitor the street. "I know. Is it yours?" "Someone sent it." She turned from the window and studied him. "Why? Work thing." "What kind of work?" He was tying his second shoe. "The kind I'll tell you about later." She considered this with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to push. She decided not to push. This was one of the things about Bea that he could not fully account for, the way she seemed to understand at 6, that certain information had a right time and that demanding it early was its own kind of waste. "Will you be home by bedtime?" "Yes." "Promise?" "Promise." She returned to the rabbit. He got in the car. Celeste met him in the lobby of a different building entirely, a quiet address in the north part of the city, a townhouse that served, he would later understand, as the organizational headquarters of the foundation. Not her home. Neutral ground, chosen deliberately, which he noted and did not comment on. She had prepared a brief. An actual brief printed 2 pages, which she handed to him as he sat down and which contained a summary of their agreed-upon history, how they met, when, the texture of their connection as she intended it to appear to the people in that room on Thursday. He read it the way he read anything, completely without rushing, noting the places where something had been smoothed over. "You have us meeting at a gallery," he said. "Is that a problem?" "I've never been to a gallery." She looked at him. "Have you been to a museum?" "Yes." "Then you've been to a gallery. The distinction matters less than you think, and only to people who've spent too long in both." He looked back at the brief. "You have me saying I work in facilities management." "You do work in facilities management." "I fix things in buildings." "That's not management. It's a broader description. It's a description you're more comfortable presenting." The room was quiet. She was looking at him with that expression, the rapid recalibrating look that she seemed to produce whenever he said something she had not predicted. It was not irritation. It was more like the response of a person who was accustomed to directing conversations and had just discovered that this particular conversation had two drivers. "If you want this to be convincing," Owen said, setting the brief on the table, "it needs to be true enough that I don't have to think before I answer. I fix things in buildings. That's what I do. I'm not embarrassed by it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right. All right. All right." She picked up a pen and crossed out the line. "You fix things in buildings. That's what you do." He thought he saw something shift in her expression. Something very small. Not approval exactly. More like the kind of involuntary response a person has when something unexpected turns out to be easier than they prepared for. They spent 90 minutes going through the brief. She was organized and direct, and covered everything with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the details were where things came apart. He answered her questions and corrected the answers that felt dishonest, and asked her 3 things about herself that were not in the brief and that she answered slowly, like a person unfolding something they'd kept folded for a long time. Her father had started the foundation in her mother's name. Her mother had died when Celeste was 11. She had grown up understanding that the hotel was her father's monument to the life he'd built, and the foundation was his monument to the life he'd lost, and that she was responsible for both. She said this plainly. Not for effect. Because he had asked. He did not tell her that his wife had left when B was 3. He did not tell her about the year after, when the apartment on Daly Street had felt enormous in a way that made no spatial sense, and when he had moved through his days with the specific care of a man carrying something breakable and having no one to set it down with. He did not tell her any of this because she had not asked, and he had not yet decided what to do with the fact that he wanted to. Wednesday after school, B was with him at the Adair Grand. This happened occasionally, not often, but on the days when the after-school program ended early and his neighbor Mrs. Ferris was unavailable, B came to the site and sat with a book in the service corridor or, when the job was lobby work, on the small bench near the maintenance closet that Owen had quietly designated as hers by leaving a folded jacket on it every time he worked the ground floor. She was sitting on the bench with her book when Celeste came through the service door at 4:40. Celeste stopped. B looked up. They regarded each other with the mutual, unhurried attention of two people who had not known to expect each other and were now doing the work of deciding what to make of it. "Hello," B said. "Hello," Celeste said. "I'm B." "I'm Celeste." B closed her book on her finger to hold the page. "Are you the lady from Dad's work thing?" Celeste glanced at Owen, who was packing his kit and was pretending with partial success to not be listening. "I suppose I am," Celeste said. B looked at her with those level, cloudless eyes. She did the thing she did, the assessment, the quiet taking apart and putting back together. Owen had watched her do this his entire life, and he still could not fully predict its outcomes. "You look like you're trying to figure something out," B said. Celeste was quiet for a beat. "What makes you say that?" "You have the same face my dad makes when something's hard, but he hasn't told anyone yet." B opened her book again, returning to her page with the simple efficiency of someone who had delivered information and considered the matter complete. "He does that when he doesn't want me to worry. But I always notice." The service corridor was very quiet. Owen latched his case. He did not look at Celeste. But he felt the moment the way you feel a change in temperature, not dramatically, not all at once, just the undeniable shift of the air between two people when a child has said the true thing that neither of them had been willing to say first. The dinner was tomorrow. Thursday was 12 hours away, which was either enough time or not nearly enough, depending on which part of it you were thinking about. The brief had been revised. The story was clean. They had rehearsed the surface of things, how they'd met, how long, the particular shorthand of two people who had chosen each other, and it had the functional plausibility of something built on real materials even if the architecture was invented. What they had not rehearsed was this. Owen had come to the hotel at 7 p.m. at Celeste's request. A walkthrough, she had said. Familiarizing himself with the spaces the Hargrove guests would associate with him. The lobby, the upper mezzanine, the private dining room on the second floor where the Foundation's quarterly reports were sometimes presented, and where her father's photograph hung in a frame that was slightly too large for it, and had always been slightly too large for it, and which no one had ever adjusted because adjusting it would have felt like a comment. The walkthrough had been quick. Professional. Celeste moved through the hotel the way she moved through everything, with complete command of every variable, narrating the relevant details in the clean, unembellished way she narrated all things. He followed. He listened. He asked 2 questions and received 2 precise answers. Then, in the private dining room, standing in front of the cabinet where the Foundation's bound annual reports were kept in chronological order going back 22 years, she had stopped. Not for emphasis. Not as a rhetorical device. She had stopped the way people stop when something catches them they were not expecting to be caught by. She was looking at the photograph. Her father. 40-something in the picture, which meant it was taken before Celeste was born, before the hotel had its current name, before most of the things that currently defined his legacy had come to exist. He was standing in what appeared to be a construction site, hard hat, no jacket despite the apparent cold, grinning the way people grin when they are building something they cannot yet see but can already feel. Owen looked at the photograph. He looked at Celeste. She was not sad, exactly. She was the way people are when they are standing close to something that was once enormous and has now become simply true. He would have liked tonight, she said. Not to Owen specifically. To the room, or to no one. Then she seemed to remember herself, and the composure came back across her face like a curtain drawn, and she turned toward the door. "There's coffee in the East Lounge," she said. "We should go over the seating arrangement for tomorrow." "Celeste," he said. She stopped. "What time does this building close?" She looked at him. "It doesn't. It's a hotel." "Then we have time," he said. "Sit down for a minute." The East Lounge at 7:30 on a Wednesday evening was the quietest version of itself. 3 guests in the far corner, voices low, the clink of glassware doing its soft arithmetic. A fire in the grate that was more atmosphere than heat, but enough. A staff member brought coffee without being asked, because this was a hotel that trained its people to anticipate, and then withdrew without ceremony. Celeste held the cup with both hands. Owen noticed this. She always held cups with both hands. He had been noticing small things about her for 3 days and had not examined why. "Tell me about him," Owen said. She looked across the rim. "The brief doesn't require." "I'm not asking for the brief." She considered him with that expression. The one that preceded the moments when she decided to answer honestly rather than efficiently. "He built things," she said finally. "Not just the hotel. Everything." He was the kind of man who looked at an empty lot and saw every possible version of what it could become. Not naively. He understood cost, he understood failure, he'd had enough of both. But he never stopped seeing the potential first. A pause. "I got the hotels. My brother got the optimism." "Where's your brother?" "Chicago. He builds affordable housing. He's considerably less wealthy than me and considerably happier." Something dry and honest moved through her voice. "My father would say we each took what we needed." "What did you need?" She looked at him. It was a different quality of question than the ones they had been exchanging. Both of them registered that. The stability, she said slowly. The thing that doesn't move. I needed to be responsible for something that would still be standing regardless of what else happened. She looked at the fire. After my mother died, my father kept building. He didn't stop. I used to think that was how he avoided grieving. Now I think it was how he grieved. He made things so she would always have somewhere to come back to if she could. The fire shifted. A log resettled with a quiet sound. I do the same thing, Owen said. She looked at him. Not building, he said. Fixing. It's the same impulse, I think. Something's broken, something needs to hold, I go toward it. I don't really think about it. He turned his coffee cup once on the saucer. After Denise left, I spent a year fixing every broken thing in the apartment. Faucet, closet door, a crack in the kitchen tiles I'd been ignoring for 2 years. B was 3. She used to sit on the floor and hand me tools she was too small to name. That's how she learned your work. That's how she learned that things can be repaired. He said it quietly, without weight, the way he said the true things, not for effect, just because they were true. There's a difference between a thing that's broken and a thing that's ruined. I needed her to know that early. Celeste was looking at him the way she had looked at the photograph. With the quality of attention reserved for things that matter. Why are you kind to me? She said. The question arrived without preamble. She had not planned it. He could see that in the slight shift of her expression immediately after, the fractional surprise of a person who has heard themselves say something before they decided to say it. He didn't answer immediately. He gave it the time it deserved. I don't think I'm doing anything unusual, he said. You are. She said it plainly. The corridor. The brief. The way you corrected me about the gallery without making it a confrontation. The way you sat down just now instead of going over the seating arrangement. The seating arrangement will still be there in 20 minutes. That's not an answer. He looked at the fire. My father used to say that kindness was only impressive when it cost you something. Otherwise, it was just manners. He paused. I'm not sure this has cost me anything yet. So I'm not sure it counts as kindness. It costs you something, she said. Not money. The other kind. He looked at her. She held his gaze with something that had been sitting behind her eyes for 3 days and had not, until this moment, found the surface. I'm not easy, she said. I want to be honest with you about that before tomorrow. I don't let things in easily. I was built for management, not for this. A small, precise gesture that meant everything adjacent to what they were doing. Every person in my life has either wanted something from the hotel or wanted something from the foundation or wanted something from the version of me they read about in a magazine. I have been transactional for so long that I sometimes can't tell the difference between a real conversation and a useful one. She looked at him directly. This feels like a real one, she said. I don't entirely know what to do with that. Outside, somewhere above the lounge's high windows, rain had begun. Not aggressive rain, the quiet, settling kind that arrives in the evening and makes the world smaller and warmer by contrast. Owen reached across the table and moved the coffee pot slightly closer to her cup. Not a grand gesture. Just a small, practical act of attention. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Just let it be a real conversation. She looked at the coffee pot. She looked at him. Something moved across her face that was not the CEO, and not the brief, and not the 11 years of careful, armored self-sufficiency. It was simpler than all of those things. It was just a woman in a quiet room who had been asked a real question, and had answered it honestly, and had not been managed for it. She poured the coffee. All right, she said. 2 words. But the way she said them, with a particular softness of someone setting something heavy down for the first time in a very long time, told him everything the brief never could. Outside, the rain settled in. Inside, the fire held. The dinner went well. That was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the only thing that was supposed to matter, the reason for all of it, The brief, the rehearsal, the 90 minutes in the East Lounge when the conversation had quietly become something other than preparation. The dinner went well, and the foundation board left the Hargrove Club with a particular satisfied composure of people who have confirmed what they wanted to confirm, and Celeste's position was no longer being quietly contested, and the 14 community health programs her father had built in her mother's name were safe for at least another quarter. Owen had worn the suit she arranged for him. He had sat beside her at the long table and answered questions about his work without embarrassment and deflected questions about their relationship with the patient, unelaborate honesty of a man who simply did not perform. When a board member named Harlan, older, silver-haired, the kind of man who asked personal questions in the tone of professional ones, had leaned across the table and said, "What is it you see in her, if you don't mind my asking?" Owen had looked at him for a moment and said, "She builds things so they'll still be standing. Not everyone does that." He had not looked at Celeste when he said it. He had not needed to. She had been quiet in the car afterward. Not the composure quiet. The other kind, the kind that came after something had cost more than expected, and the person was still taking the inventory of the cost. "Thank you," she had said, when the car stopped outside his building on Daly Street. "You're welcome," he had said. A pause. The city outside the car windows doing its night version of itself, slower, lower, the lights multiplied by wet pavement. "I'll be in touch," she had said. He had gotten out of the car. He had watched it pull away. He had gone upstairs and paid Mrs. Ferris and checked on B, who was asleep with a rabbit and one arm hanging off the mattress with the relaxed confidence of a person who trusted the floor to be there, and he had stood in the hallway for a long time before going to bed. "I'll be in touch." That had been 9 days ago. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself this in the specific, deliberate way that meant it did matter, that the matring had already taken up residence somewhere in his chest and was not responding to eviction notices. He had her number. She had given it to him on the first day for logistics, and it was still in his phone under the contact name he had entered without ceremony, Celeste Adair Hotel. The parenthetical clarifying something that no longer required clarification. He looked at it more than he intended to and did not call it, because calling it would have required a reason, and the real reason was not one he had decided what to do with yet. He went to work. He fixed things. He dropped B at school and picked her up and made her dinner and read to her and checked the refrigerator drawing every morning with the ritual he had not interrupted since she made it. On day 4 of the silence, he drove past the Adair Grand on the way to a job on the east side. Not a detour. The route went past it naturally. He looked at the building the way you look at a place that has become, without your consent, associated with something other than its function. He kept driving. On day 6, Marcus Webb, who managed the hotel maintenance contracts and who processed Owen's work orders with the cheerful efficiency of a man entirely uninterested in the human context of anything he administered, called to confirm availability for a baseboards job on the 4th floor, and Owen asked, in a voice he calibrated carefully to sound like a man asking about a baseboards job, whether the hotel was fully operational this week. "Far as I know," Marcus said. "Why?" "Scheduling," Owen said. "All good on our end," Marcus said. "Ms. Adair's been traveling, but the building runs fine without her. That's how you know something's built right." Owen thanked him and ended the call and sat in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store for 3 minutes doing nothing. Then he went in and bought the baseboards materials and went to work. Traveling. That was fine. She traveled. She ran an empire. The dinner was 9 days ago, and the arrangement was the arrangement, and he was a grown man who had survived considerably more disorienting things than the silence of a woman he had known for less than 2 weeks. He was aware, distantly and with a specific discomfort of self-knowledge, that he was no longer thinking about the arrangement. On day 9, B asked about her. They were at the kitchen table. Homework, long division, which B approached with the same systematic rigor she brought to everything and which she resented with equal precision because, as she had explained to Owen on multiple occasions, long division had the particular injustice of requiring you to show your work even when you already knew the answer. "Is the lady from the hotel coming to dinner?" Owen looked up from the grocery list he was making. "What? You said I could invite her." B wrote a number, erased it, Wrote it again. You said you'd pass it along. I said I'd pass it along. Did you? He looked at the grocery list. Not yet. B looked at him. She did the thing. The reading. She's gone, isn't she? It wasn't a question. It had the flatness of something B had already concluded and was checking against available evidence. She travels for work, Owen said. Is that the same as gone? He didn't answer immediately. B returned to her long division with the particular diplomacy of a 6-year-old who understood that some questions were better left to answer themselves. That night after she was asleep, Owen sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. The third figure. Pink dress, orange hair, 2 dots for eyes and no finished face. He thought about the East Lounge. The rain outside. The way she had held the coffee cup with both hands. He thought about I'll be in touch and the 9 days of silence after it. He thought about Harlan at the Hargrove dinner asking what he saw in her and the answer that had come out of him without planning, clean and honest, the way the true things came when he stopped guarding them. She builds things so they'll still be standing. He sat with that for a while. Then his phone buzzed on the table. Not a call. A message from a number he recognized, arriving at 10:47 on a Wednesday night without preamble or apology, the way she communicated when she had stripped something down to its essential components. I need to tell you something. Not over the phone. Are you available tomorrow morning? He looked at the message for a long moment. Something in the phrasing. Not can we meet, the practical language of logistics. Not I wanted to check in, the smoothed-over language of someone managing distance. I need to tell you something. For words carrying the specific weight of information that has been held too long and is now heavier than the holding. He thought about Marcus. Ms. Adair's been traveling. He thought about the way she had looked at her father's photograph. The things she had said about building things so they would still be standing regardless of what else happened. He thought about the board member whose name he had finally looked up, Harlan Price, and the way Price had watched Celeste across the table with an attention that was not the admiration of a man watching someone perform well, but the calculation of a man watching someone perform and deciding how long to let them continue. Something cold moved through him. Slowly, without drama, the way the real kinds of cold arrived. He typed back, yes. What time? The response came in under a minute. 7. The hotel. The service corridor. The service corridor. Not the East Lounge. Not her office. Not the private dining room with her father's photograph on the wall. The service corridor where they had started. Where nobody would see them. He set the phone down on the table and looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. The third figure with the unfinished face. Standing there in orange crayon, patient and waiting. What are you trying to tell me, he thought, that you knew before I did? He did not sleep well. He was at the Adair Grand at 6:52. She was already there when he arrived. 6:52 in the morning and she was already there, which told him the night had been the same for her as it had been for him. Long awake, the hours moving at the specific pace they move when you are waiting for a conversation you cannot yet see the shape of. She was standing in the service corridor with her coat still on and her hands at her sides, not holding a cup, not holding her phone, not doing the managed, purposeful things she did with her hands when she needed to project steadiness. Just standing. Looking at the middle distance the way people look when they are organizing the order of what they need to say. She heard him come through the door and turned. You came early, she said. So did you. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, there are people upstairs. I need you to come with me before I explain anything. I know that's not fair. I'm asking anyway. He looked at her. All right. They took the service elevator to the mezzanine level. She did not speak in the elevator. He did not fill the silence. The elevator opened onto the mezzanine corridor and she led him toward the East Conference Room, the one with the glass wall that overlooked the lobby below. He understood why she had chosen it when he saw what was in it. Harlan Price was standing at the head of the conference table. Not alone. Beside him sat a woman Owen didn't recognize, late 50s, the specific composure of a family attorney, and two men he had seen at the Hargrove dinner, both of whom had been positioned at the far end of the table that night and who had watched Owen the way people watch something they are deciding how to classify. Prior Vance, the duty manager, was standing near the door with the expression of a man who had been summoned to a meeting he did not fully understand and was managing this by making himself as architecturally neutral as possible. Marcus Webb from Maintenance Contracts was there too, which Owen had not expected, and which he filed immediately without examining. Celeste walked to the head of the table on the opposite side from Price. She did not sit. She looked at the room with the complete, undefended composure of someone who has finished deciding what they are going to do and is no longer spending energy on the decision. "Thank you for coming," she said. To the room. To Price specifically, in the measured way that made courtesy into its own form of precision. Price looked at Owen. Not with the relaxed assessment of the Hargrove dinner. Something had changed in it. Something had been recalibrated, and what was left was the expression of a man who has built a position carefully over time and has just registered that the ground beneath it has shifted. "Ms. Adair," he said, "I'd like to know why a member of your maintenance staff is in this room." "He's here because this concerns him," Celeste said. "And because he deserves to hear it directly." The board's position. "I'm going to speak first," she said. "Then you can speak." The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when a person with authority uses it with complete intention. 9 days ago, Celeste said, Mr. Price contacted my foundation's legal counsel with information he claimed would compel a review of my position as chair. The information concerned the nature of my relationship with Owen Hurst, who had accompanied me to the Hargrove dinner as my partner. Mr. Price had obtained documentation suggesting the relationship was an arrangement, that Mr. Hurst had been compensated for his attendance. Owen's hands were flat on the table. He had not decided to put them there. His body had made the decision independently, looking for something solid. "This is accurate," Celeste continued. "There was a financial arrangement. I asked Mr. Hurst to accompany me, I explained my reasons, he agreed, and he was compensated for his time. I want to be clear that this was my decision entirely. Mr. Hurst was honest with me at every point and behaved at the dinner and in all related interactions with more genuine integrity than most people I have encountered in 20 years of professional life." She looked at Price directly. "What I did not tell Mr. Price's counsel during the 9 days of negotiation that followed is what I am going to tell this room now. Because it is the part that actually matters." She reached into the interior pocket of her coat and placed a single folded letter on the table. She did not open it. She left it there, present and closed, like a fact that had been waiting for its moment. "Mr. Price's challenge to my chairmanship is not about the arrangement," she said. "The arrangement is the instrument. The motive is that the Foundation's land holdings on the South Corridor, my father's original acquisition, the site of 3 of the 14 programs, represent a development opportunity that Mr. Price has been positioning to access for 4 years. Removing me as chair and installing a provisional board removes the one structural obstacle between that land and his consortium's planning application." The attorney beside Price opened her mouth. "I have the documentation," Celeste said simply. "My legal team has had it for 6 days." The room reconfigured. Not dramatically. These were people who managed their reactions the way professionals managed everything, efficiently, with minimum visible expenditure. But something changed in the arrangement of the air. The two men from the Hargrove dinner exchanged a look. Marcus Webb studied the table. Prior Vance found something newly interesting about the pattern of the carpet. And Harlan Price, who had sat in hotel lobbies and foundation boardrooms and Hargrove club dining tables for 11 years managing the particular relaxed authority of a man who believed he controlled the architecture of every room he entered, went very still. Not defensive. Not immediately. First, he went still. Then he straightened the document in front of him that didn't need straightening. He recapped his pen. He said in a voice that had been carefully returned to its social register, "We'll need to verify the provenance of any documentation before." "Of course," Celeste said. "My counsel will be in touch with yours by end of day." That was all. It was enough. Owen didn't speak until they were back in the service corridor. The same corridor where it had started, where she had crouched beside him and asked the unreasonable question that had rearranged the next 2 weeks of his life. She handed him the letter. I wrote this, she said, during the 9 days. I want you to read it. He looked at it. His name on the outside, written in her handwriting, which was smaller and more careful than he had expected, the handwriting of someone who thought before each word rather than moving through them quickly. Why didn't you call me? He said. During the 9 days. Because I needed to resolve it before I told you, she said. And because, she stopped. Started again with the particular honesty she produced when she had decided not to protect herself from a true thing. Because I didn't know yet what to say about the rest of it. And I didn't want to call you until I did. He looked at her. The rest of what? She nodded at the letter. He opened it. It was 4 pages, written by hand on hotel stationery, the kind with the Adair crest at the top that he had seen in the executive corridor without ever touching. She had not written it to explain the situation. She had not written it to manage the narrative. She had written it the way people write when they are finally addressing something they have been not addressing for long enough that the weight of it has become structural. I have been trying to work out, she wrote, when I stopped thinking of this as an arrangement. I keep returning to Wednesday evening. The East Lounge. You asked me what I needed and I told you the truth and you did not do anything with it except let it be true. I don't have much experience with that. I have experience with people who receive information and calculate what it means for them. You received it and just held it. I didn't know what to do with that at the dinner. I still don't entirely know. He read slowly. The 9 days were not absence. I want you to understand that. They were the opposite of absence. Every negotiation with Price's counsel, every document my legal team prepared, every decision about how much to expose and when and in what sequence, I made all of it with the knowledge that getting it wrong would touch you. Your name, your work, your daughter's stability. You walked into this with nothing to protect except what was actually true. I was not going to let someone use that against you. He stopped. Read that paragraph again. What I haven't said, and what I should say clearly because you have been honest with me from the beginning, and I owe you the same. I told Price's counsel during the 3rd day of negotiation that the arrangement had become something else. They asked me to define it. I told them I couldn't yet, but that it was real. They said that was not a legally useful statement. I told them I didn't particularly care. I am not good at this. I have said that to you already and it remains true. But I am telling you that whatever this is, I would like to find out what it becomes. Not because the foundation needs it. Not because the optics require it. Because you fixed the tile in the northwest corner of my lobby and told Harlan Price what you saw in me before I had asked you to. And because my daughter's drawing on your refrigerator has a figure in it with no finished face and I have been thinking about that for 9 days and I cannot stop. The arrangement is over. I would like to ask you something else now, if you're willing. I'll explain in person. C. Owen stood in the service corridor for a long time after he finished reading. He thought about Wednesday evening and the rain outside the East Lounge. He thought about Bea handing him a tool she was too small to name. He thought about I'll be in touch and the 9 days and the way she had gone still in front of her father's photograph. He thought about what she had said to Price's counsel on the 3rd day. It had become something else. He folded the letter along its original creases. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where it settled with the comfortable weight of something that belonged there. He looked at Celeste. She was watching him with the expression she had been wearing since he finished the last page. Open in a way she had not let herself be open in that corridor on the first morning, when she had crouched beside him and asked the unreasonable question, and he had said, "Tell me why first." She had told him why. She had now told him everything. "What did you want to ask me?" he said. He looked at her for a long moment. The service corridor held them both in its particular quiet, the low hum of the building's infrastructure, the distant sound of the lobby beginning its morning routine 1 floor above, the whole vast machinery of a place that ran continuously and without sentiment, regardless of what happened in its margins. "What did you want to ask me?" he said. She looked at him with the open expression that had replaced, somewhere between the letter and this moment, the composure she usually wore the way other people wore armor. "Whether you'd like to have dinner," she said. "A real one." Not a brief. Not a table assignment or a rehearsed answer about how we met. Just dinner, somewhere ordinary, where neither of us has to be anything other than what we actually are. He thought about the East Lounge. The rain. The coffee cup held in both hands. I know a place on Millard Street, he said. It's not what you're used to. Good, she said. What I'm used to hasn't been working particularly well. He almost smiled. Saturday. Saturday, she confirmed. He nodded once. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and felt the letter still there, folded along its original creases, carrying the weight it had carried since she handed it to him. Not heavy exactly, more like the weight of something real, which was its own distinct category. Celeste. She looked at him. The figure in the drawing, he said. The one with no finished face. B drew that 3 weeks ago. She calls it the mom. She went very still. She means a future one, he said. Not a replacement. She's too precise for replacement. She means someone who would choose to be there. A pause. I'm telling you that because the letter mentioned it and because you should know what it means before Saturday. It's not a small thing in our house. She absorbed this with the complete careful attention she brought to important information. Not retreating from it. Not managing it. Receiving it. I know, she said quietly. That's why I mentioned it. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up his kit from where he had set it by the door when he came in, because he still had a baseboards job on the 4th floor, and the baseboards did not care about letters or revelations or the particular reconfiguring of a life that happened quietly in service corridors before the rest of the world was fully awake. I have to get to work, he said. She blinked. Then something moved through her expression that was not quite surprise and was not quite laughter but lived close to both. The look of a person encountering, for perhaps the first time, someone whose life did not pause for significant moments because the significant moments had simply been added to the life rather than replacing it. Of course, she said. 4th floor, he said. Baseboards on the east wall. Should take about 2 hours. I'll know where to find you, she said. He went to work. He was on his knees in the 4th floor corridor, fitting the first length of baseboard against the wall, when his phone buzzed. Not Celeste. His neighbor Mrs. Ferris, a reminder about pickup time, whether he needed her for the afternoon or if he was collecting B himself. He texted back, I've got her. Thanks, Greta. He set the phone down and went back to the baseboard. This was the thing that nobody who looked at his life from outside could fully understand, and which he had stopped trying to explain. The work did not diminish the rest of it. The rest of it did not interrupt the work. They were the same life, running parallel and uncontradicted, and the man who had just read 4 pages of honest, handwritten feeling from a woman who was beginning to mean something to him was the same man who was now pressing a baseboard flush against a 4th floor wall and checking the level with the same focused attention he brought to every job. He had not become different. Something had been added. There was a difference. He was loading his kit into the truck at 10:15 when Marcus Webb appeared at the service entrance behind him. Marcus had the expression of a man who had been in a room that morning that he had not expected to be in, and was still organizing his thoughts about it. Hurst, he said. Marcus. Marcus leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, which was his version of a formal posture. That was something this morning. He said it carefully, the way careful people delivered observations they hadn't fully classified yet. Yeah, Owen said. Price is going to make noise, Marcus said. Not in that room, he's too smart for that. But in the margins. He's been in this building's orbit for 11 years, and he doesn't exit quietly. A pause. I'm not telling you this to worry you. I'm telling you because you should know what you're adjacent to before you decide how adjacent you want to be. Owen looked at him. Are you telling me to be careful? I'm telling you she's going to need someone who doesn't get managed, Marcus said. And I've been in this building long enough to know those people are rarer than the marble floors. He straightened up. That's all. Invoice for the baseboards is in the system. He went back inside. Owen stood by his truck for a moment in the pale morning light, the city doing its mid-morning version of itself around him, ordinary, continuous, unimpressed by anything that had happened in the service corridor 2 floors below. He thought about what Marcus had said. Not the warning. The other part. Someone who doesn't get managed. He thought about B at 6 years old sitting on the kitchen floor handing him tools she couldn't name, learning without knowing she was learning that broken things could be made whole by someone who showed up and paid attention and didn't leave when the work got complicated. He thought about Denise leaving. Not with anger. He had spent his anger on that a long time ago and had gotten nothing useful from it. He thought about it the way he thought about the faucet that kept returning to its slow drip, the closet door that needed lifting to close, something that had been broken in a way he couldn't permanently fix, and which had taught him over the 3 years since, that some things were not meant to be fixed by him. Some things were simply part of the record. What you did with the record was the work that actually mattered. He had a daughter who drew figures with no finished faces and called them family. He had a letter in his jacket pocket from a woman who had chosen honesty over management when it mattered. He had a dinner on Saturday at a place on Millard Street that was not what she was used to. It wasn't a complete picture. There were pieces still missing, edges unresolved, the whole thing still too new to see clearly from any distance. There would be complications. Marcus had been right about that, and Marcus was usually right about the things that lived in the margins of buildings. Price would find another angle. The foundation board would want further reassurance. The world that Celeste inhabited professionally was one that assessed and recalibrated constantly, and would not simply absorb a man who fixed tiles and baseboards without subjecting him to the full weight of its scrutiny. He knew all of this. He got in the truck. He had a job at 1 o'clock on the north side, a cracked windowsill in a building he'd worked twice before where the super was a quiet man named Gerald who always had coffee going and never asked questions that weren't about the job. He had to stop at the hardware store on the way for the sealant. He had to pick up B at 3:30, which meant leaving Gerald's building by 3 o'clock at the absolute latest. He had to pick up B at 3:30. That was the thing that grounded everything, the ordinary anchor that held the rest of it to the earth. Not because the rest of it wasn't real, it was more real than most things in his recent life, and he was no longer pretending otherwise. But because B at 3:30 was B at 3:30, unchanged by revelations and letters and dinners on Millard Street, unchanged by the rearranging of her father's life, patient on the bench with her book and the stuffed rabbit, waiting for the figure who always showed up. He started the engine, first try, the way it had been going lately, as if the truck had decided to cooperate with the general direction of things. He pulled onto the street. He thought about Saturday. He thought about the letter, still folded in his jacket pocket. He thought about a drawing on a refrigerator held by a pineapple-shaped magnet, and a small figure with orange hair waiting to have its face finished by someone who had not yet arrived but was, slowly, turn by turn through an ordinary city on an ordinary Thursday morning, getting closer. Some stories start with a catastrophe. Some start with a miracle. This one started with a cracked tile in the northwest corner of a lobby, and a woman who crouched beside a man the building had never seen, and asked the most unreasonable question available to her, and got the only answer that was ever going to matter. He said, "Tell me why first." She told him everything. The rest was just the work of showing up. And Owen Hurst had never in his life walked away from work that needed doing. If this story reached you today, wherever you are in the world, drop your city in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to see how far this travels. And if something in this landed with you, hit that like button. You'll know why by the time you've sat with it a while. That's their story. That's all of it.